It is the worst hour of the night, and you are wide awake. No phone buzzed, no bad dream shook you loose. There are no phones here. There are no mattresses, no fans, no wall with cold air breathing behind it. You are lying on a thin mat of dried grass inside a shallow rock shelter in southern Africa, and the year is roughly 200,000 BC. The stone above your head is still leaking out the heat it swallowed all afternoon. The air sits on your chest like a wet blanket. Something with far too many legs is taking a slow walk across your ankle, and your body is stuck on a problem that no amount of wanting can fix. To fall asleep, you have to get cooler, and nothing around you is willing to help. Now flip to tonight. You will climb into a room someone quietly chilled to around the perfect sleep temperature, because at some point you look that number up and your thermostat has obeyed ever since. Your body will drop its core temperature by about 1 to 2 degrees, blood will rush out to your hands and feet to dump the extra heat, and you will be gone. No effort. No thought. You will barely notice it happening. Here is the thing nobody tells you. That easy, boring, forgettable slide into sleep is the single most over-engineered comfort you own. For almost the entire run of the human story, a hot night was a nightly emergency, and the people who lived through it did not just tough it out. They solved it, on 5 different levels, and every one of those solutions is still switched on inside you right now. Let's start with the part you can't see, your skin. Packed into it are somewhere between 2 and 4 million tiny sweat glands, called eccrine glands. That is far more than any other primate walking the earth. Most mammals cool down by panting, which is slow and only gets you so far. But somewhere between 2 and 3 million years ago, as your ancestors left the shade of the forest and stepped out onto the open grassland, evolution made a wild trade. It gave up fur and bet everything on sweat. Andrew Best, working at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, published a study in 2018 comparing sweat glands across primates, and the conclusion was blunt. Humans wound up with a shocking density of these glands as a direct answer to living under sustained, punishing heat. And here is the part that gets skipped. Shedding your fur was not only a daytime tool for the hunt, it was sleeping technology. Fur traps heat against the body, strip it away, and your bare skin turns into a radiator. Heat pours off you into the air, especially at night, when the world finally lets go of a few degrees. That is why the nakedness came first. Darker, melanin-rich skin only spread across human populations later, once the body was already mostly bare and needed the sun protection. Harvard's Daniel Lieberman is famous for the idea that this hairless, sweating body let your ancestors run prey to exhaustion under the noon sun, but that same body was also bleeding heat into the dark every single night. Your ancestors were walking their own cooling system around, and they never took it off. Except your skin can only do so much. Think about it for a second. You can sweat all you want, but if the air touching you is just as hot as you are, that heat has nowhere to go. This is the exact wall every warm climate human ran into, and they did not just live with it, they built around it. The oldest proof of that building was found in that same shelter, a place called Border Cave, on the edge between South Africa and Eswatini. In 2020, archaeologist Lynn Wadley of the University of the Witwatersrand published a study in the journal Science describing grass bedding roughly 200,000 years old. The oldest known bed on Earth, and it was not a careless pile. It was broad grasses layered over a base of ash, not dirt. Ash, from earlier burned bedding, kept and relayed across generations. That ash did 2 jobs. It made a dry barrier between the sleeper and the heat-soaked ground, and it choked crawling insects, clogging the tiny holes they breathed through. Tucked into the grass were bits of camphor bush, a plant people in East Africa still use today to keep bugs off. That is not bedding, that is a pharmacy you sleep on. And the ground was the real enemy. Rock and packed earth drink up sun all day, and then let it back out slowly after dark, like a hot pan pulled off the stove. If you have ever crossed a parking lot barefoot at dusk and felt the tar still warm hours after sundown, you have met this problem. Your ancestors could not turn that heat off, but a thick raft of dry grass over a layer of ash trapped a pocket of air between the body and the baking floor, and air is a terrible conductor of heat. That pocket worked exactly like the insulation in your walls, not by making cold, but by blocking heat from crossing. 200,000 years ago, in a cave, somebody worked that out. We will never know their name, but they invented the bed, and the bed was a machine for staying cool. Even then, on the very worst nights, the heat still won. And that is when your ancestors reached for their strongest tool of all: time. In 2015, Gandhi Yetish, working with the UCLA sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, tracked the sleep of 3 living hunter-gatherer groups whose way of life still runs close to the ancient pattern: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. And what they found broke the tidy story we tell ourselves, that early people slept from sundown to sunup. They did not. Across all 3 groups, people slept an average of just 6.5 hours a night, less than plenty of office workers today. And falling asleep had almost nothing to do with darkness. It tracked temperature. People drifted off as the air was cooling and woke near the coldest point of the night, right before dawn. They were not sleeping through the dark. They were sleeping through the cool. So how do you get enough rest if the hottest nights are stealing your hours? You stop sleeping the way you do. In one unbroken block. Historian Roger Eckert of Virginia Tech spent 16 years digging through old records and turned up more than 500 mentions of a first sleep and a second sleep, 2 stretches of roughly 4 hours each, split by an hour or 2 of quiet waking in the dead of night. This was not insomnia, it was normal. People woke, poked the fire, talked, sometimes wandered next door, then dropped back into a second sleep until morning. In hot places, that gap would land in the coolest window of the whole night, the perfect time to sip water, shift to a better spot, and let your skin dump heat into the dark before the second round. And here is where it gets genuinely strange. Nobody was doing this alone. In 2017, anthropologist David Sampson, now at the University of Toronto, wired up the Hadza with wrist sensors and watched them for 20 straight nights. Across all of it, there were only 18 total minutes when every single person in the camp was asleep at the same time. 18 minutes out of 20 nights. At any given point in the dark, a middle count of about 8 people were awake, and it was not random. The oldest people nodded off and woke earliest. The youngest stayed up latest. Together they made a rolling wave of wakefulness that covered nearly the whole night with somebody's open eyes. Sampson gave it a name that I love: the poorly sleeping grandparent hypothesis. Your grandmother waking at 4 for no reason is not a glitch. It is a 2 million-year-old alarm system still running. Sit with that. Heat did not only change when your ancestors slept, it changed how they slept and who was awake at any moment. The camp worked like one body, cycling through rest and watchfulness, never all the way unconscious, never all the way exposed. So the person who jerked awake at 2 in the morning, soaked and irritable, was not failing at sleep. They were nailing the assignment. Awake in the dangerous hours, able to scan the dark, feed the fire, check on a kid. The heat that woke them was, in a backwards way, part of what kept them alive. Let's stand in that camp for a second. It is late, the fire is low, most bodies are stretched on grass rafts, and a couple of older people are sitting up, murmuring, not because anything is wrong, but because sleep let go of them early, and there is no reason to force it. Somewhere a child rolls off the cool edge of a mat and gets nudged back. Nobody is anxious about the gap in the night. The gap is the plan. And as camps grew into towns, the buildings started fighting the heat too. The Sumerians, the first real city builders, roughly 5,000 years ago in what is now Iraq, put flat roofs and open courtyards on their homes on purpose, because summer nights indoors were unlivable. They cooked, ate, and slept up on the roof, out under the open sky. That was not giving up. That was physics. A clear night sky is a giant heat drain. Every surface under it quietly radiates warmth straight up into space, and with no ceiling in the way, a rooftop can slip a few degrees below the air around it. The Egyptians pushed it further, hanging wet reed mats across doorways so any breeze came through cooler, and setting out water-filled clay pots as rough little coolers. And in the Persian desert city of Yazd, builders raised tall windcatcher towers, some over 1,000 years old, that funneled moving air down into the rooms below and could pull the indoor temperature down by a startling amount. None of these were luxuries. They were sleep tools, built by people who understood one rule cold: if you cannot cool the body, cool the air, and if you cannot cool the air, move your body to where the cool already is. Now step back and look at the whole thing. Your ancestors faced a puzzle that would flatten most of us the second the power went out. A body that must cool to fall asleep, locked inside a night that refuses to cool. And they answered it on every level at once. With biology, trading fur for millions of sweat glands and turning bare skin into a radiator. With materials, laying grass and ash between the body and the hot ground. With timing, chasing the temperature down the night and breaking sleep into halves. With community, spreading wakefulness across the whole group so nobody slept too deep in the dark. And with architecture, lifting their beds toward the open sky and pulling wind through towers. Every one of those answers is still inside you. Your temperature still drops before sleep. Your hands and feet still flush warm to vent heat, which researchers at the University of Basel found is the single best predictor of how fast you actually fall asleep. You are a tropical animal who inherited a problem so thoroughly solved that you forgot it was ever a problem at all. So tonight you will get into bed. The air will be cool. The sheets will be smooth. You will not think about any of it. But somewhere under the memory foam and the thermostat and the quiet hum of the machine keeping your room at the perfect number, 200,000 years of restless, sweating, clever ancestors are still lying awake beside you. They never once got the perfect night's sleep. They just made very sure that you could. Here is my question for you. When you wake up at 3 in the morning for no reason at all, does it feel like a curse? Or after hearing this, does it feel like something older keeping watch? Tell me down in the comments. And if this rewired how you think about a bad night's sleep, you know what to do.